For a while now, I've been trying to figure out a way to discuss things that are on my mind that don't fit neatly into the narrative I'm building in the main series. It takes a long time to write, produce, and edit a full episode of the Unified Theory, and I wanted some way to be able to produce quicker, more bite-sized episodes that cover current events and other time-sensitive issues as they arise. This is the solution I've come up with. I'm your host, and this is the first installment of Loose Threads, a subseries of the Unified Theory. A little backstory about me. I'm a registered Democrat, and I have been for most of my life. I voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and in 2020 I volunteered for and donated to the Bernie Sanders campaign. And in November, in the general election, I voted for Donald Trump. I did not and do not support Joe Biden. I believe he is a senile, corrupt puppet of the elite, a position that has only been strengthened in the few days since he's taken office. In a flurry of executive orders which began almost immediately after his inauguration that no one attended, the most popular president in history destroyed thousands of American jobs, admitted to having no plan to combat the pandemic or the economic crisis facing our country, reduced our energy independence, increased the cost of prescription medicine, and redeployed troops to the Middle East. But hey, at least he didn't post anything mean on social media. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for myself. For the past couple days, I've been reposting memes and screenshots calling out Biden and his supporters for the incredible damage he's done already, and that I believe he will continue to do if he's allowed to remain in office. The response from my friends and followers has been interesting, although not altogether surprising. Over the past couple days, I've been accused of being racist, homophobic, transphobic, insane, stupid, angry, and a bitch. Now, I can assure you, none of these things are actually the case, but it's amazing how quickly so many of them have resorted to name-calling simply because they disagree with what I have to say. I shouldn't be surprised, really, since it wasn't that long ago that I was just like them, and believe it or not, I'm not really all that different from them now. I just see things a little differently because I overcame a little something called cognitive dissonance. If you're not familiar with the concept, cognitive dissonance is basically a description of the discomfort that people feel when they're presented with two contradictory pieces of information that both seem to them to be true. Here's a quick video that explains it in more detail.
Cognitive dissonance is a state of uneasiness that happens when you have inconsistent beliefs or behaviors. You may have felt it when you learned new information about the world that contradicted something you'd believed for a long time, or maybe you learned something about your behavior that conflicted with your sense of self. For example, someone might experience cognitive dissonance if they believe they're not a prejudiced person, but after a psychological test, they realize they have a lot of implicit biases. This discomfort can come up in all kinds of scenarios, though, and we can even see it in the brain, notably in the region that monitors errors in your thoughts and actions, the one involved in rationalizing and cognitive control, and one likely involved in emotions, especially anger and disgust. Of course, knowing how our brains respond to this stress doesn't make these feelings any easier, and it also doesn't make it easier to admit we're wrong. Instead, how hard it is to change your mind about something depends on what psychologists call your resistance to change. And that trait depends on a few factors, such as how much you identify with your belief, how much satisfaction you get from your behavior, and how much pain or loss you'd have to endure to change those things.
For me, my breaking point occurred early on in the pandemic. I actually had a pretty serious manic episode at one point that lasted for a few days. My worldview had been challenged to the point that my mind needed to break down the old structures and start over from scratch. The foundations I had built upon previously had given out from under me, and when I managed to get a grip on reality again after a few strange days where I was convinced we were on the brink of the honest-to-goodness end of the world, I began the long process of rebuilding my worldview based around rationality, consistency, and facts. Not facts, quote-unquote, as they were and are filtered through corporate media, political spin machines, expert opinions, and socially approved narratives, but facts that I could arrive at by looking into first-hand sources, raw data, historical precedents, and the like. Now let me be clear. I'm not suggesting that my new worldview is free from bias, nor is it the pinnacle of dispassionate rationality, free of error, brilliant in its simplicity, or anything of the sort. I have simply made an effort to look at things more objectively and tried to come to what I believe to be more honest conclusions that are derived from my observations, rather than trying to seek out facts that support a preconceived worldview or refuses to consider facts that are in opposition to it. I try to avoid getting bogged down in dogma or clinging too tightly to any position, and I usually try to see things from the opposite point of view. Even when I disagree with someone on a position, I can usually empathize with them enough to see why they've come to the conclusion they've come to, even when it's obvious to me that they arrived at a faulty conclusion because they started from faulty premises. I'm not angry with them for having reached a different conclusion because, again, it wasn't that long ago that I was just like them. As an example, let's take a look at the speech Trump gave for which he is currently being impeached.
Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol. And we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them. Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
I'd be willing to bet that this is the first time many of you have actually seen this, despite believing wholeheartedly that he's guilty of inciting a riot. I actually wasn't able to find a video of the entire speech, although I did find a transcript of it that I'll link to down in the description. It's long, but if you have the time to read it, it's kind of important. You've been told that this was a dog whistle, a way of saying something without actually saying it, but do you realize how insane that sounds? The urge to avoid cognitive dissonance is so powerful that you're willing to convince yourself that someone meant what they did not say, that they meant the opposite of what they actually said, because what they actually said doesn't fit with what you think they're actually like. Now, on the other hand, here's a video of Kamala Harris talking to Stephen Colbert about the riots from this past summer.
They're not going to stop. And everyone beware, because they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that they're not going to let up, and they should not.
Trump has been repeatedly called a racist for his refusal to apologize to the Central Park Five.
You have people on both sides of that. They admitted their guilt. If you look at Linda Fairstein and if you look at some of the prosecutors, they think that the city should never have settled that case. So we'll leave it at that.
Whereas Joe Biden is supposedly a bastion of racial unity.
Are you going to apologize like Cory Booker
Apologize for what?
Cory Booker's called for it.
Cory should apologize. He knows better. There's not a racist bone in my body. I've been involved in civil rights my whole career.
You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking.
And by the way, you know, I sit on the stand and it get hot. I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
Even call centers, which rushed overseas in the hundreds of thousands, How many times you get the call? I'd like to talk to you about your credit card. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
They're going to put you all back in chains. You all back in chains. You all back in chains. You all back in chains.
But I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
Trump's also been accused of being racist against Mexicans, as evidenced by his insistence on building a wall on America's southern border. But apparently, immigration reform is only racist when it's proposed by Donald Trump.
All Americans, not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country, are rightly disturbed by the large numbers of illegal aliens entering our country. The jobs they hold might otherwise be held by citizens or legal immigrants. The public service they use impose burdens on our taxpayers. That's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more, by hiring a record number of new border guards, by deporting twice as many criminal aliens as ever before, by cracking down on illegal hiring, by barring welfare benefits to illegal aliens. In the budget I will present to you, we will try to do more to speed the deportation of illegal aliens who are arrested for crimes, to better identify illegal aliens in the workplace as recommended by the commission headed by former Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. We are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws. It is wrong and ultimately self-defeating for a nation of immigrants to permit the kind of abuse of our immigration laws we have seen in recent years, and we must do more to stop it.
There are plenty more examples I could point out, but I encourage you to go do your own research. You'll be amazed at how many things like this you'll be able to dig up once you start looking. I know I was. I'm not suggesting that Trump is perfect. He's actually kind of an asshole, and he's never tried to hide that fact. What I am suggesting is that you've been lied to, you've been tricked, and that many of the opinions and beliefs that you hold are not actually your own. They've been provided to you by a corrupt media that has become the propaganda wing of the government and that does not have your best interests at heart. Let's be honest. Most of you haven't done any of your own research. Most of you haven't sought out sources, analyzed data, or even taken the time to consider if what you've been told makes sense. You've gone with the program, believed what you were told, behaved in a predictable way, and allowed your arrogance to convince you that you're smart despite having put forth zero actual effort, and that people who disagree with you are dumb. Does that sound about right? I can't change your mind for you, and many of you watching this will still choose to rationalize away what's right in front of your face. I do hope that some of you will take the red pill, unpleasant though it may be, and join me in trying to figure out what the hell is really going on before it's too late. I don't know exactly what the truth is, but it's very clear to me what it's not, and I believe that for most of you, deep down, that's clear to you too, even if you don't want to admit it. Thanks so much for listening, and God bless America. I'm your host, and this has been The Unified Theory.